Coming to you from sunny South Carolina, it's the Palmetto Conservative Show with your host, Jim Lee. From the upstate to the low country, from the coast to Columbia, we'll cover what's right and uncover what's wrong in the Palmetto State. If we see it, we say it. We call it like it is in South Carolina. And now, it's the Palmetto Conservative Show. Let's jam.
Welcome into the Palmetto Conservative Show here on the Conservative Broadcast Media Network. I'm your host, Jim Lee, part political junkie, part technology geek, part commentator, and sometimes snarky agitator for the application of common sense and the pursuit of critical thinking in the marketplace of ideas, particularly as it relates to the Palmetto State. I don't profess to have all the answers, folks, just an awful lot of relevant questions. Hope you're doing well on this last program prior to the most important election of our lifetimes, if the hyperbole is to be believed, and let me tell you, I think it's to be believed. And we'll talk a bit about that tonight. Usual and customary disclaimer here on the Palmetto Conservative Show. Not here to simply give speeches, not to display rancor or vituperation, or exert bitterness. I'm not here to display incendiary language or trying to incite violence, but I do hope to inflame your senses and to incite you to do something that we need desperately more of in our political discourse these days, and that's critical thinking. I regret that we continue to have difficulties here with the call-in number, so there will be no call-in part of the show this evening, but I will be here once again, assuming my cathartic position on the couch, and hopefully bringing you some, well, if not snarky, some insightful discourse about what's going on in politics, what's going on in the Palmetto State, and that you'll enjoy it. Here as we take on the cacistocracy. Again, for those who are new to the program, the cacistocracy is, well, as they say, it's government by the worst of us. And that's pretty much what we have these days, government by the worst persons, or a form of government in which the worst persons are in power. And depending on your particular political persuasion at this point in time, there are a lot of people that believe that the worst persons are in power. And I would tend to agree with them. You know, one of my favorite quotes is a quote that comes from, well, someone who is certainly a much greater philosopher than I, and that's Plato. And the quote says that one of the penalties for refusing to participate in politics is that you end up being governed by your inferiors, something that we have an awful lot of these days as we as we continue to look at the what passes for intelligence out of the leadership in our state houses and in Washington. Well, I'm here not just to simply rail against liberals. I'm not here just simply to rail against Democrats. I have plenty of disdain and dissatisfaction with the Republican Party and those who profess to be Republicans and those who profess to be conservative Republicans. So we're here to take on all comers. So where do we get started tonight? You know, as I sit here in an undisclosed location here in the state capital of South Carolina, what struck me the most over the last week was all of the attention and focus and fastouche about the notion of looking presidential. You know, it bothers me a lot that it seems that so much of our discourse and so much of our assessment of things is based on the superficial, whether it's truly just superficial appearance. Oh, he looks telegenic. He doesn't. He has nicer hair. He doesn't. She looks better on camera. She doesn't. Or whether it's these well, terms that really don't have a real meaning. What does it mean to look presidential? Some say that in the debates, Governor Romney, in the first debate certainly, looked presidential, and President Obama kind of looked out of his league. In the second debate, some said that President Obama was much more aggressive, seemed more domineering, arguably seemed petulant, but yet Governor Romney appeared presidential. And then the third debate, now it's a mixed bag. Some say that the president did finally show up and appear presidential. But then, well, let me put this into context. Visualize in your mind a boxing match in which the two contestants in this boxing match to appear presidential. In this corner, weighing in at 4 American lives, Benghazi Consulate. Benghazi Consulate. Let's have some applause there. In this corner, weighing in at potentially tens of billions of dollars, but something over which we have absolutely no control. Hurricane Sandy. Can I get a round of applause for Hurricane Sandy, please? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So we have this boxing match set up. And the goal is to figure out, how do I look presidential? Because that's what the media has teed this up. In the case of Hurricane Sandy, President Obama cancels his campaign events to be able to stay in Washington to look presidential and attend to this superstorm, this super hurricane, this Frankenstorm, to take care of disaster preparations. Which on one hand I find just absolutely hysterical, because when I think about President Obama's background and the extent of his leadership and organizational skills are wrapped up in the notion of community organizing, that he is somehow going to take on and lead the charge in the U.S. government's response to what ostensibly was or is or was the most significant weather event to have occurred in the United States. He flies down to Florida on Air Force One to deliver pizzas to some campaign volunteers, cancels his event, flies back to Washington, D.C. the next morning. You can thank the taxpayers for some of that cost, although I understand the campaign has to reimburse the government for actual campaign use of Air Force One, which to me would be pretty much its entire use for the last 4 years, but that's a whole other story. So the president is trying to appear to look presidential and to appear as though he is in charge and that he is leading the response to something over which, number one, we have absolutely no control. This hurricane is going to do what this hurricane is going to do, which is why we have at the state level the National Guard, and at the state level a disaster preparedness, a person with responsibility for disaster preparedness. We have at the federal level, we have FEMA, and we have Homeland Security, and all these other agencies. We have tons of people whose day in and day out job is preparedness for these sorts of things. And the president has to come back to Washington in order to make sure that all of these things are orchestrated, managed, directed, because otherwise the government wouldn't function. And then on the other hand, Benghazi. Here's a situation where sovereign U.S. territory is attacked Now, whether that attack was a spontaneous demonstration, or whether it was a terrorist attack, or whether it was a coordinated assault by a nation under their flag, or whatever, it was an attack on sovereign U.S. soil. The United States consulate in Benghazi, Libya. Now, without getting into the full dissertation on what did President Obama know, when did he know it, there are a couple of things that just don't pass the sniff test. But this much we know for a fact. The president knew that there was an attack on sovereign U.S. territory before he went to bed. And the next morning got up, hopped on Air Force One, and flew to Nevada for a fundraiser. In retrospect, not looking too presidential. And now I ask you, in one case, Hurricane Sandy, there are resources at the state level, at the federal level, whose day in, day out job is to deal with these sorts of things. Where I would hope that aside from signing a piece of paper declaring an emergency, a federal disaster area, aside from that administrative exercise, I would hope that it does not require a whole lot of coordination with the president to get somebody to make a decision to, go rescue people, to go ahead and authorize the movement of emergency resources that have already been planned and staged and all that sort of thing. But in the case of Benghazi, where sovereign U.S. territory has been attacked, where there really is only one person with the decision-making authority, short of convening Congress to declare war, that can commit American resources to defend that sovereign U.S. territory, to defend our people. That he chooses the time to be in Washington to look presidential is one where, quite frankly, a qualified manager of a Walmart could have coordinated the resources, as opposed to one in which the President of the United States is the only authority. And he chooses to get on a plane and go to Nevada for a fundraiser, for a political fundraiser. If that is what qualifies as looking presidential, those two things, we've got a long, long way to go. Continue this rant coming back on the other side. Stick with me. We'll be right back.
This is not a message of confidence or reassurance. It is a crisis of confidence. The productivity of American workers is naturally dropping.
We aren't out there hungry, selling America. We've been a little bit lazy, I think, over the last couple of decades.
The symptoms of this crisis of the American spirit are all around us.
We've lost our ambition, our imagination.
Owning things and consuming things.
You go to a bank and you use an ATM. You don't go to a bank teller.